The USOs, the unidentified submersible objects, they're pretty interesting, and I'm glad to see that they're finally come to the forefront as well in the broader discussion.
Yeah.
Transmedium, as they call them.
Transmedium?
Yeah, that they can go through any sort of material environment, whether it's space or submerged in water.
Well, all of this is definitely a highly controversial topic, subject matter, but definitely a high interest. And if you don't think it is, or anybody that doesn't think it is, just take a look at all the UFO sci-fi television shows and movies and things that are out there. To me, it's like, why would we have such an interest in that if we don't have some sort of interest in the real life as far as UFOs, UAPs? Thank you for returning to listen to part 2 of my conversation with author Martin Keller, The Space Pen Club. We begin by talking about Hollywood and the government agency.
Well, the subject's become a huge cottage industry within the entertainment world, and from the 50s forward, you can probably list some of the bad B movies that were made about flying
Those were great. Those were great, though. Those are like what some of the best.
Yeah, they're great guilty pleasures. They're fun to watch. Their effects are cheesy, and some of them were very good. But it's now a whole genre in Hollywood, and as I said, and I think it might have been the proposal for my book, I said, the appetite for information and knowledge on this subject is universal, and it's never satisfied because people want to know.
Yeah.
People ask, "Are we alone?" Which is a question that always disturbs me, because we're on a planet that will have 8 billion people on it by November of this year, and I don't think alone in space. Don't we have each other? Shouldn't that be enough? And if there's other interstellar visitors, all the better. But people do want answers, and on my more cynical days, I don't think we're ever going to get them. Not a straight answer, but I would be delighted if we did. If there was a true disclosure where governments of the world said, "Yeah, these things are from Alpha Centauri and 5 or 6 other places, and here's how they get here, and we're going to establish, a mission or some sort of diplomatic opening to them, and we'll learn a whole bunch more. We'll all go back to kindergarten again."
That'll be the day, and it would be so interesting if anything like that could happen in my lifetime. But like I said, I highly doubt that. As much as I would love for it and to see it, and for it to be that way, I don't have any confidence that it will happen.
Well, I kind of feel the same way, but then I think, who knew that the New York Times would put this on the front page instead of the National Enquirer, back in 2017. Anything can happen, but will it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Exactly. Speaking of stay tuned, what's next for you as far as writing goes, aside from the Space Pen Club?
Well, I'm still blogging regularly at www.thespacepenclub.com. I try to blog once or twice a month, although I've been pretty negligent in August because I've been so busy with my regular public relations work. But I started a new book about Bob Dylan. And the world probably needs another book on Dylan about as much as it needed another book about UFOs and the paranormal, but there you go. I mean, I think I have some fresh insights on Dylan that maybe other writers and Dylanologists don't have. I had a 3-4 hour interview with him in '83 when Infidels came out. In 1990, I spent a week on the Never Ending Tour. I knew a lot of his close friends in the Twin Cities area. I spent some time with him socially. So I think there's a good tale there.
There can never be too many books on Bob Dylan, especially you have your experiences, somebody else has theirs.
Yeah, it's just a matter of marketing, number one. But having something new to say, probably more important. and hopefully I'll have that. I mean, a lot of people who've read the Space Pen book said it has expanded their thinking on it. I mean, I still have close friends that think I'm completely off the ledge, and my book is incomprehensible, blah blah blah. And then I have other people who say, you know, this is a page turner based on my experiences, but also my interactions with. Sorry, I got a motorcycle going racing by, but also my interactions with some of the key researchers in the field, and also many interactions with media. There's a whole chapter dedicated to how poorly media has handled this, and that's set in the volcano zone of Mexico, where I went down with a CSETI team to do some investigative work. Because Mexico, if you want to see UFOs, go to Mexico, in particular the volcano zone. It's right outside of Mexico City, about 42 miles away. Beautiful. There's an active volcano down there and then a silent one. They're kind of twin peaks, if you will. The active one is one of the largest volcanoes in North America, Mount Popo, as the locals call it. And there's been quite a bit of UFO activity there. In fact, there's a web camera trained on that. It has picked up some startling images, not just around the volcano, but going and coming from the cone of the volcano. Pretty mind-blowing. Anyway, that whole chapter is set down there with this CBS crew from 48 Hours who unfortunately made us look like rubes, like real gringos out in the volcanic zone trying to vector in spaceships from who knows where. But when you read the book, you get a whole different perspective on it.
Do you have your own theory or thoughts as far as why these UFOs, UAPs are heavily concentrated in certain areas, like it said, volcanic activity, volcanoes, military bases? Because first thing that comes to my mind is energy source, power, volcano, magna, military bases, things like that. I don't know if you've got a thought.
I don't have anything conclusive. I think the well-documented cases of these objects probing, are nuclear bases around the country. And this has also happened worldwide. Pause for 1 second to take a drink. I think that's a really interesting development, and it's been ongoing for quite a few years, since the dawn of the atomic age. And in Chapter 4, I get into some pretty good detail about such an incident that happened at Minot Air Force Base, which is about 100 miles from where I grew up in western North Dakota. And this a friend of mine, Tom Talene, who lives in Minneapolis, not too far from me, did a really terrific job on this, and it's posted online. You can read it. He interviewed all the pilots involved. People on the ground saw it, and a plane in the air bombing I don't want to call them a bombing crew, but a crew that was piloting a bomber doing a routine daily was on its way back from its run, and they saw the object in the air. So you've got military personnel on the ground and aviators in the air, and there's some perfect triangulation for you. Mm-hmm. And everyone said the same thing. And then the cherry on top is that this object was able to disable a launch silo, and moved a concrete block, like a 20-ton concrete block, off the silo. So capability that would give anyone that's in the national security industry, would give them the willies. I mean, it's like, what the hell are these things doing around our nuclear bases? And Robert Hastings has written an entire book about. Robert Sala has held some of his own meetings in Washington about these things, probing our atomic capabilities at different bases like Maelstrom in Montana. So I think that was also brought up by Representative Gallagher from Wisconsin during the congressional hearings. He point blank asked the two guys from DOD, "Are you familiar with this?" And no, they weren't, which I think made them look rather ridiculous. But I was very glad to hear that type of questioning from a sitting congressional person on this committee.
Here's a book title suggestion for you when you're ready to write we'll call it a part 2 to the memoir for the Space Pen Club. It'll be called Prime Directive, and it'll be talking about the power, why UFOs, UAPs are hovering around nuclear bases and volcanic activity. Is there a prime directive to interfere, not interfere, or to prevent us from doing something?
You know, when I was really heavily involved with CSETI in the 90s, I always heard from other people in the UFO world, or the UFO ghetto, as Steve Greer liked to call it, that there really was a prime directive, and they would not intervene except in really dire situations, maybe, to prevent a world war and the use of nuclear weapons. But again, who knows? I mean, these are big questions. We don't have the answers, and I'm sure the people that know or who are charged with knowing, they're probably not going to be forthcoming with the answers themselves.
No, we'll get those pages with blacked out spots all over it, 80% of it, and you get 20%. Here's 100% of the book, but there's only 20% of the information.
Yeah, the heavy use of redaction.
Mm-hmm. So once again, where can folks go to get your book?
Amazon is the best place. It's quick. It's reasonably priced. It's not a bad way to go. I know people have a lot of misgivings about giving Jeff Bezos more money, but it's pretty efficient, and for the time being, click it on there.
You know what? I'll give him my money because it's convenient. Besides that, he and Elon are using their SpaceX and their Blue Origin, and they're the ones that are going to go to Mars before any government agency. I think it's going to be the private sector.
Yeah, they might, and they might also be the first to have some real encounters in space, which I think is one reason why we're seeing the government scramble to try to get out in front of that and manage it when that does happen, and I think it will happen.
Yeah, and that's what we call close encounters of the fifth kind. It's us, humankind, mankind, making that approach. I don't know how to say it, but we initiate the contact, right?
Yeah, we do. Although Dr. Greer's got a whole set of contact protocols for that in close encounter of the fifth kind that involve three modalities: mind, sound, and light. And if your listeners are very interested, I highly recommend watching his film Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, which talks about the process and the results. And it's a mind expander, a mind zoomer, as we would call it, back in the real Space Pen Club, which they're actually Greer's other films on the secrecy, unacknowledged, and Sirius are also worth your time.
Okay. I would really like to have you back on to really talk, what do we call it? The paranormal. Now I'm at a loss of words for what it's called as far as mind transfer, as far as being able to project and yourself and to see what's on the other side, that type of thing, since the military was in
remote viewing.
Remote viewing, yes. If you're at all into any of that, I would definitely love to have you on and just have an open conversation about that, maybe with a couple of guests or something.
Yeah, that'd be fun. I think, for me, that's the final frontier, and Colonel John Alexander, in his book called Myths, Conspiracies, and Realities, he writes, "We agree that at times physical craft exist, but there's much more to the phenomena. Unfortunately, true boundaries are unknown. It seems certain that human consciousness is at least part of the formula." And I think that's absolutely right. There's another favorite quote of mine in the book, and we can wrap it up on this note if you want. This quote is almost 100 years old, and it was delivered by J.B.S. Hall, a British geneticist and evolutionary biologist, who said, "The universe is not only stranger than we suppose," although he used the word queer, which obviously has changed in 100 years, "but it's queerer than we can suppose." And that's kind of where I leave things, and I'm waiting for the universe to enlighten us in the next phase of whatever it is that's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I've enjoyed our conversation, and I need to get your book, and you can put me first in line for your Bob Dylan one as well.
Very good. Thanks again, Chuck, for the time. It was a good conversation. I'd be happy to come back.